I'm not exaggerating when I say that this video took upwards of 12 hours to make. Indominus Rex Alpha was a complete enigma to me, and hopefully by the end of this video I can explain to you exactly why it took so long to build. This commander wants us to discard from hand into the graveyard various creatures with keywords to get counters. The number of counters, and it doesn't matter which type, result in a single card drawn for each. And for clarity, as this will come up later, I promise we could have, let's say, 2 indestructible counters on the Rex, and it will draw us 2 cards. Duplicate counters still draw us cards. Let's just jump right into the problems I ran into with building this commander deck. I am absolutely not a fan of running bad cards for the sake of making our commander function. This is why certain commander decks like Edgar Markov don't really appeal to me. Sure, we don't have the cream of the crop. In fact, some of us are awful, the cards, but go ahead and include us anyway, just to make the deck function. In some cases, if the commander has a big payoff like Lathril, I hate it less because you get to harvest the fruit of your tribal labor by beaming everyone across the table for 10 damage. Edgar Markov, on the other hand, is mostly just an advantage engine. And in the current state of the game, I think I need a little bit more than just advantage to feel good about a deck build, let alone recommending it to thousands of other people. My gripe with Indominus Rex starts here. Have you looked at the quality of the keyword soup cards? In general, they're absolutely awful, with the exception of certain includes like Elder Gargaroth. But even then, good includes like this are hard to come by. Most of the decks you'll see are running Venomthrope, Vengeful Reaper, Nighthawk Scavenger, Gurmag Swiftwing, the list goes on. What are these doing in my deck? If I had a choice, they would be gone instantly. At least that was my initial assumption. I was convinced there would be a better variant out there, some gem in the rough. After all, we have access to green, and big stompy things tend to have more than just trample, right? Well, it turns out that my assumption was mostly incorrect. After hours of poring over the blue, green, and black keywords available, the community really has picked out the best. At least the cards that give us the most bang for our buck. Begrudgingly, I start to come around. But Kyle, I think to myself, the Rex don't care about the type of counter. You should just build a +1/+1 counter synergy deck instead. And yeah, here comes the next rabbit hole. So I begin scouring the internet for signs of +1/+1 counter synergy in the absence of white. Which green cards can I play that give me ETB +1 counters? After a long and painful search, the answer is not that many. Sure, we have a few all-stars like Arwen, Master Biomancer, and Biophagus, but aside from these, there really is a lot to be desired. Nonetheless, I began to make a strictly +1/+1 counter synergy deck with the intent to boost up the Rex to some insane numbers. It made sense to me. Make the Rex big and then swing, Voltron style. But as the deck came together, I realized that I was abandoning the thing that made this commander cool. Discarding, turning our dinosaur into some freaky mutant. It made me stop dead in my tracks and rethink what I was doing. Frustratingly, I scrapped the entire build. Time to start over. Again. Now we're back at it, including cards that I otherwise would have used as Firestarter this winter when I came across an interesting keyword on one of my new favorite cards, Staff of Completion. What was that keyword, you might ask? Proliferate. Some of you may have already guessed it. The Alice in Wonderland down the rabbit hole deck building begins again. That single word made me really consider the mechanics of our commander. It's sneaky, but our commander enters with the counters of our choice through discarding, but then that second line of text comes in. When Indominus Rex enters the battlefield, draw a card for each counter on it. When? It's a triggered ability. What does that mean? We're using the stack. Why does that matter? Priority. And why does priority matter? Well, we hold priority to cast an instant spell, boosting up the number of counters on our Rex before the ability resolves, or perhaps use an ability at instant speed to add to our counters, drawing even more cards. So let's use an example on the stack. Let's say our commander becomes the target of removal. Jimmy jumps in wanting to Pongify the Rex, and that makes us sad, but actually we should be happy because this gives us, the player, a window to abuse our commander's ability. You see, now that we get priority back, we can then use our instant speed spells to proliferate or add +1/+1 counters before the Pongify resolves. But Kyle, isn't that pointless? Won't the Rex just draw the initial number of cards before the Pongify is resolved? Nope. Per rules section 608.2h, if an effect requires information from the game, such as the number of creatures on the battlefield, the answer is determined only once, when the effect is applied. If the effect requires information from a specific object, including the source of the ability itself, the effect uses the current information of that object if it's in the public zone it was expected to be in. If it's no longer in that zone, or if the effect has moved from a public zone to a hidden zone, the effect uses the object's last known information. The game checks the last known information to determine the number of cards drawn, which means we get those extra cards. Now, if we had added to the stack first and then somebody removes the Rex, unfortunately, we only get the initial number of cards based on the counters it had at the time of entering the battlefield. I hope all of this makes good sense. If not, rewatch it. I promise you this will help. And with that out of the way, I was off to the races. I finally had a clear goal in mind: abuse the ETB effect by adding counters as cheaply as possible before the Rex ability resolves. This is why my list includes cards like Yawgmoth Thran Physician, Vorel of the Hullclad, Cankerbloom, Staff of Completion, Ripples of Potential, and 2 cards that I guarantee you've not heard of: Fate Transfer and Unspeakable Symbol. This 10-cent common can move upwards of 20 to 30 counters onto the Rex if we first use the Ozolith to place all stored counters on a creature first. Then in our main phase 2, we add all of those counters to our Rex with this ability. And that will end the game pretty quickly. Or with Unspeakable Symbol, our life total becomes the resource. Pump to your heart's desire until you've drawn your fill. On a good day, you can spend 30 life to draw 10 cards, and I would make that deal any day. I hope you can see just how nutty this is, and I think other YouTubers just really haven't done the extra research necessary to better understand the mechanics here. The cards I mentioned, aside from Yawgmoth, tend to financially be pretty cheap and can turn your game state into a one-sided massacre. And then after all of our drawing that we're going to be doing, how about we food chain our commander and then just replay it? Then on the next cast, we can effectively dump every creature out of our hand, because remember, we're not capped on this and the creatures do not have to have any keywords. We just pitch them. Then we can food chain the commander again, cast Rise of the Dark Realms or maybe Living Death, and then profit like an evil genius. Yes, I've thought a lot about this and have started even dreaming about this scenario. Let me talk briefly about a few other includes that I think are being slept on. Let's start with Vigor. This guy is generally good, especially in counter synergy decks, and in a pinch, we can pitch him to the graveyard, which will unfortunately shuffle it into the deck. I just really like the resilience that it gives our board, just making everything a bit stickier. And people will only be able to block so long before the crushing weight of the Rex comes down on them. Next is Titan of Industry, which is super low on the inclusion list. This has 2 great keywords, and this guy is an amazing reanimation target. And in a pinch, it's also a great blink target too. We can abuse the ETB effect to help cripple our opponents, replenish our life totals, go wider, you name it. Very versatile card. And on the topic of blink, Deadeye Navigator lets us blink our commander for repeated value. Every time it enters the battlefield, we discard and then draw an insane number of cards to keep the train rolling. Or what about a consistency piece? Adric Mathematical Genius. Triggered and activated abilities commonly are becoming more and more troublesome for me, and having a counterspell on a stick is fantastic, and being able to versatilely double the number of counters on ETB with our commander is just gas. Before we wrap up the video with some absolute bombs for this deck, I wanted to highlight a card that is a complete non-bow with our commander. Karen Wanderer is included in way too many decks. The idea here is to discard it later in the game to draw a ton once we've already filled up the yard. This has one problem though. It won't work. Why won't it work? Because Karen Wanderer does not know it has keywords until it hits the battlefield. That's right. It's not like a star creature where the power and toughness is calculated in every single zone, including your hand. Karen Wanderer needs to be on the battlefield, so discarding it will do absolutely nothing. This, I think, is just an error card that was thrown in before people really understood the inner workings and mechanics of this commander. Finally, let's talk about a few of the all-star cards for our deck. Greater Good tends to be amazing in this style of deck where our Rex is going to be huge anyway. For instance, drawing 10 to only discard 3, etc. And often this will set up the yard for us for bigger reanimation plays as well. Don't be afraid to sacrifice your Rex for value. And don't forget, you can choose to just send the Rex to the graveyard instead, where then you can reanimate it for cheaper, allowing you to then proc its ability again. I mean, seems pretty good. And finally, Threats Undetected is our last card I want to talk about. This is a tutor with some downside, and our opponents will be able to choose which creatures go to hand and which go back into the deck. But I have some good news. We don't really care what our opponents put back. These 4 cards I'm going to put up on screen in any combination are really going to be great for us. And you can switch it up, of course, but when you're pulling threats with this card out of your deck, you have to not only think about your card draw that you're going to get with the Rex, but also the reanimation potential. And Elder Gargaroth and Endwraith's Forerunners tend to be a better reanimation target than a Vengeful Reaper, for instance. 12 hours later, and we finally arrived. Well, Really, I've arrived at the end of this video. I'm very proud about how this video turned out, and I hope that this is by far the most helpful Indominus Rex video that you will watch. If you agree or you got something out of the video, then please consider subscribing. It means a lot to me, knowing that the work that I put into these videos is actually useful and not just some chaff. I have some very interesting videos planned, new series, and eventual live streams that I'll be doing, all of this made possible by you. I can't wait to see where this channel takes us. I've been Kyle, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.